Welcome back to another reading and correcting with me, Kindar, the Tiger Writes, and Ty, the Tiger Supervisor. These are where I read a chapter from one of my stories and correct it as I go. If you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch and YouTube. And if you are looking to support me, that is on my Patreon. Today, we are doing chapter 70 of Stepping Wild. All right, the caravan master called. He was a lanky man, now dressed to show wealth rather than the comfort of travel. For the new ones with us, stay with the caravan or the stalls. Teleris isn't a city kind to troublemakers. I'm not paying to get you out of whatever cell they threw you in. The information was new to Tibs. Nothing in his reading about the city had indicated it was harsher on criminals than any other city. A learned city, one of the scholars had written as a descriptive. It had the largest library in the kingdom of Fristerek, which was why Tibs had picked this caravan. The other had been that it had been the closest to the Forest of the Lost. Nothing he'd read about it hinted to monster or creatures. There weren't even mention of unusually large animals. The only thing he'd noted when reading about it was the reason behind the name. People who went in the forest rarely returned. There were many ordinary reason it happened. The forest was large and dense, so getting lost and dying there would be common. It as would be exiting elsewhere, but you'd expected that to be noted. People unable to explain how they'd found themselves with some place were as noteworthy as those of vanishing. If Even if there were no large animals, one could still die of a reasonably sized one or group of them. But the possibility a dungeon was the cause couldn't be ignored. And if he found nothing, one of the road away from Toleris eventually reached the city of Durimar. He'd find a caravan to travel with, be thwarted yet again in his attempt to be a runner, and move on to more searching from there. He had time. Tibbs had ample time. Unlike all cities he remembered, the caravan market was immediately past the gate instead of deep within the city, where all could reach it with the same ease. Many were next to the transportation platform, adding visitors as possible customers. The stores were well made of wood and stone. The sense of permanence was there. Nowhere was there space for hastily put up tent. Flowers and small trees took whatever space was present between stalls, adding a sense of comfort to the market's bustling traffic. He spent the time this the time his time spent the time helping merchants set up eager to see how else the city made itself comfortable for its citizens. When the sun reached its zenith, Tibbs and his team were done setting up the merchant they'd been assigned to, and they found the caravan master for their pay covering this leg of the journey. Tibbs didn't tell him he wasn't returning. He only warned them when he'd built a friendship, and this time he hadn't. It hadn't been him actively keeping the others from being close, but the guard leader ran things much like Tibbs figured armies ran, and it hadn't led to many friendships. Actually, one, it hadn't to any friendship. And he might return. Even the presence of the library, the largest in the kingdom, wasn't a guarantee he'd stay. The claims might be the claim might be wrong. The subjects it covered might not be of help to him. A week was long enough to work out that. He spent the rest of the day wandering the shops and taverns that lined the marketplace, speaking with the people behind and at the bar. They there there was even an inn offering rooms, and he saw a few merchants paying for them. As with any inn he'd eaten at, the food was better than the tavern, but like the previous I don't need that. Like any inn eating that. I've already, that's enough. So, the food was better, but he didn't stay long. Quickly, he always found himself missing Craggle Rock and his friend there. The reason for his conversation with the barkeeps and the patrons didn't serve him as well here as it usually did, as they usually did. Taverns and the locals who frequented them were usually good places to get a sense of the city. They suggest places to spend their coin, neighborhoods to avoid, why their city was so much better than the previous one he'd been to, the next one he'd go to. Everyone he asked answered him, but those answers came with an unexpected amount of light for how positive they were. He always expected some light. People would always exaggerate to make their city seem better than elsewhere, but so much outright lies, especially when the answer to how did the city treat its worker was the city made sure everyone was well looked after. How was the city better than Kustiran, the next city destination for the caravan? In all ways, of course. Were nobles fair to the cities less fortunate? Returned him with a blazing, the fairest of any cities, of course. The one answer that was always dark was when he asked about the city guards, dedicated to maintaining order, not people to cross or want chasing you, never resting. Nearly without fail, unless he asked about the guard, people lied. He tried to prod, ask specific question that would let him work out the truth, but immediately the person turned nervous, worried, at times outright fearful. None of him. They looked around when that happened, mumbled apologies, and moved away from him. And moved away. I don't need to form him. There had been no guards in the tavern, not even anyone paying them attention. Not that a glance would reveal anyone's skill at eavesdropping. Once darkness fell on the city, Tibs went looking for his answers. Running the roofs proved more difficult than other cities. Someone already owned them and was protective of them, and organized in doing so. He'd expected to find someone in charge, like the master, or what Jackal described as his family. But enough oddities about those guarding the roofs registered to make him doubt thieves, however organized they might be, were responsible. They did wear leather, cut for running and quick motion, but there was a uniformity in their make that he'd never seen among thieves, even organized thieves dressed as they needed for the work they did. Teams would share colors and emblems, sometimes design of armor, when they when obtained from the same merchants, but they'd never seen one place where every one of them wore the same design, as if it was enforced by an unwavering authority, the way the guards did. And the layout of the watch posts also reminded him more of guards, with each set to cover as much of the roofs as they could, limiting the gaps, then thieves deciding this section was theirs and picking whatever was close to its center. With them present, it was nearly impossible to run in a straight line for any amount of time. Staying in the blind spot was simple for him, and sensing those hiding in the shadows let him remain undetected. On top of that, unlike them, he didn't need light to see. Another oddity was how empty the alleys were. The only people he sensed walking that night walking them were guards. Even cities that enforced curfew could never stop night people from going about their business. Things turned stranger still once he reached the worst neighborhood of the city, with its building only standing because they leaned against each other, where parts would fall during any storm, and if people didn't mind the thunder, the following lightning could shatter lives along with buildings. He remembered people on the roofs in his youth holding the metal pikes. They couldn't be left there, otherwise someone would steal it and get a few broken coppers for the metal. He'd watch lightning strike one, it and the people who had held it smoking in the rain, those still alive hurrying to grab it, raise it as thunder sounded again. Here, the city street was filled with guards. Short of tearing it down for it to come back to life elsewhere in the city, this was the only way Tibs could think a city could keep life continuing at night here. Could keep life from continuing at night here. But why would Tarletis care what people got up to on the street? Nothing that happened here left it. Nearly every corner had a guard, not taking advantage of the folks or watching for anyone who might interrupt another one, taking their pleasure at the expense of the people here. They were alert, ready to what? Keep people from leaving their hovel? Every building had someone in it. Cuts filled the floor. Some had fallen asleep at tables. A few had a room of their own, and now that he had fever, he could tell when they slept or were in the middle of sex. Each time he got sense of that, left him wishing he could stop sensing that one element. Why would a city keep people from moving about at night? Streaks folks or anyone else, even the nobles' neighborhood, were only had guards in their street, although not as many, and they didn't seem to be as attentive. He eventually sensed night walkers, just so few of them as to be meaningless. He returned to the room he'd rented and slept. Once the day came, he'd visit the city and see what the light revealed. The people Tibs walked by among the stalls were well dressed, all of them. Although he continued wondering, looking for anyone drawn to the market in the hopes of begging a few coins from those flush with them, or liberating them. Without asking, he saw no one in rags, no one in worn clothing, no one here only looking for things they would never be able to get. Even the poorest person Tibbs saw had a purse heavy with coins. He doubted this was because Teleris didn't have beggars. If that was the case, it wouldn't have a street. People had to be able to fall lower to hang on the hopes begging could keep them living. Where do you think you're going? The guard demanded, stepping away from the wall she'd been leaning against as Tibbs stepped past the shop to continue along the street. They were present at each street and alleyways. I'm going to explore the city. Then he added, thinking she might not realize who he was, since he dressed in a good set of clothing, I am one of the caravan guards. I don't have anything to do until we're packing up to leave in a week. You should remain with the market. Do you have any idea how many of them I see? Yours is better than any, but it's still just a market. I want to see something else for a while. Her snort was derisive. You're looking to cause trouble. You lot are all the same. You think that traveling with merchants somehow makes you special. No, I'm just... Get back to your people, she said, placing a hand on the pommel of her sword. Your kind aren't welcome here. He returned among the stalls, surprised at the vehemence. Arguing wouldn't have done him any good. Her hatred was real. As he looked for an unguarded alley, he also looked for someone poorer than a successful merchant. One of their helpers or a servant sent on an errand because their master couldn't be bothered. Not one. When he looked down the roads, He passed. He couldn't see anyone like that heading for the market, to be turned away by one of the guard because why would the city keep people with fewer coins out of the market? He knew what was sold. Some could be afforded by poorer folks. Stop! The woman's order caused everyone along the road Tibbs had just stepped on to freeze. It was a few steps slower, surprise at the worry and fear on their face. You caravan guy! Tibbs faced her and saw the satisfaction at having his attention. The rest can go about your business. Their relief was palpable as they hurried away. Can I assist you? He asked. You know what? No, I kind of needed just to make sure it's clear. Where do you think you're going? In the city. There had been a lack of metal on anyone near the wall, so he'd moved reflexively. He hadn't considered she'd just moved away. Why? Has he had Had he ever heard so much suspicion in one word? To visit. The market's not enough for you? She asked disdainfully. All the good shops are here, just for you folks. There wasn't as much glow on the words as he expected. Not a lie, only an exaggeration. Had they really set the better shop here, away from the city center? I see markets at every city we stop at. I prefer seeing the city itself. She narrowed her eyes, and he readied himself to defend his decision this time. We're going to watch you. We don't have any patience for folks like you. Oh, I know the kind of the kind of folks who guard these things. We get your kind too often. You even think of causing trouble, and we'll know. Then you'll get to see what our cells are like. Compare them to the other ones you've spent time in. Am I clear? He nodded. She'd said all that without one word glowing. She believed it fully, but she was letting him go, and that's all that he wanted. But he felt the eyes on him well beyond the following intersections. How difficult would it be for him to blend in? His features weren't overly distinctive. His pale brown skin wasn't common everywhere, but he couldn't remember one city where he hadn't seen others of the same skin tone, or darker, or with a golden hue, or slanted eyes, or thinner mouth. He'd asked a scholar once, early in his travels, why people looked so different if they all came from the same elements. The man had explained that a long time ago, a long time before, well before the transportation platforms, people didn't travel as they did now. Because they stayed in one place, they gained characteristic of the elements that were more common there. Over the eons, those became pronounced enough, they created distinctive-looking people who had lighter or darker skin, different eyes or mouth or cheeks or shape of their bodies. Once the platform came, the man had then added, these people were able to mix, and now they could be found in so many places it was difficult to know where that first land had been. The explanation had felt wrong to Tibs even back then. When he sensed people, he didn't sense some who had more than one element compared to the other, or at least not so much that he noticed a difference when he wasn't narrowing his sense so tight only the two persons he compared registered to him. But even then, he didn't think such a small difference could be the answer. No to object, what? Oh, no two object, no matter how alike they were, had exactly the same distribution of elements. But he didn't have another explanation. The biggest problem he could think of in passing himself as one of them was that he hadn't mastered the language. Tibs saw wariness on nearly every face, not when they looked at him, but almost at any time they looked at those around them. Definitely when they looked at in the guard's directions. It was the rare person who moved about without showing concern, and what he noticed about those was that they had wealth. They dressed wealthily, and their purses were heavy with coins. If you had money, you could afford not to worry about the guards, because they could pay for the privilege. How much did that cost that only the nobles and most successful merchant could manage it? A detail that had escaped him during the night of exploration was how drastic, drastically the quality of the construction changed from one neighborhood to the other. On one side of the street, it would be all excellently built structures with vibrant colors, while the other might be shabby construction, whitewashed walls. Nothing so bad as to be falling apart the way the street was at risk of doing, but he wondered if that was only a question of time. When he stopped at a shop, he was stared at or ignored. No one was willing to sell him whatever they had. At taverns, he was ignored unless he placed the silver coins on the bar, then that vanished in exchange for a tankard that wasn't worth so much. He doubted anyone else there paid more than a copper for it. The city was not welcoming to visitors. He found a transportation platform roughly in the center of the city and deserted. No marketplace surrounded it. No attendant stood ready to welcome the next person in line and to take them to their destination. Not even one encouraging passerbys to travel, as he'd seen in some cities when few people needed their services. He could sense a handful of them with the golden tint to their essence. He could sense a handful of them with the golden tint to their essence, the golden tint of those who had void as their element, but they were in a building at the back. Someone would have to seek them out if they wanted to travel. He noticed the men and women on the roofs, if they were even allowed to travel. He walked from well-built houses to questionable construction a few streets later. A few more after that, they were even better built than that previous neighborhood. He attracted looks as much as in the shabby ones. People dressed in ways that matched the neighborhood and didn't trust anyone who didn't match them. Stepping onto the street didn't happen. This isn't a safe area for citizens, the guard who stopped him said. Tibs nodded to keep from revealing he wasn't from the city and tried to sneak in, but every alley was guarded. To see what took place there, he had to resort to the roofs and an etching of darkness to keep the watchers there from noticing him. Nothing untoward was taking place on the streets. The folks there went about surviving as best as they could under the constant eyes of guards, any who committed a crime was taken away, just as he saw elsewhere in the city. This was why everyone was worried. The city enforced its laws brutally. He smiled and decided he'd be staying for a while, no matter what the library offered. He was going to have fun here, but first he needed to find a place to stay. And this concludes chapter 70 of Stepping Wild. If you are enjoying this, please leave a like. If you want to know when the next chapter will be up, subscribe and hit the bell. If you want to read this story, it is up for free on Royal Road. If you want to read ahead of that and support me in the process, that is on Ream Story. We're about 20 chapters ahead, I believe. And if you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch and YouTube. Links are in the notes. And with that, I shall wish you a good day.